Sometimes the door you walk into by mistake is the one that rewrites your entire life. The rain came down in sharp, slanted lines, soaking through Ava Carter's thin jacket as she hurried across the street, her sneakers splashing through shallow puddles that reflected the glowing skyline of downtown Chicago, the cold biting through her skin like a warning she didn't have time to hear. Not tonight. Not when the email on her cracked phone screen read final interview 6 p.m., and it was already 6:12. Her breath came fast as she pushed through the revolving doors of Whitmore Tower, a building so polished it didn't feel real, marble floors gleaming under soft gold lighting, the air warm and expensive, a world that clearly had never been built for someone like her. Her reflection caught briefly in the glass wall beside her, damp curls clinging to her face, worn jeans, a jacket that had seen too many winters, and for half a second she almost turned around, almost convinced herself she didn't belong here. But then she remembered the hospital bill folded in her bag, the number at the bottom that made her chest tighten, her mother's voice trying to sound strong on the phone that morning, and Ava forced herself forward. Heels clicking echoed from somewhere ahead, voices low and confident. Everything about this place spoke a language she hadn't learned. She approached the reception desk, hands slightly trembling. "I'm here for the interview," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The receptionist barely glanced at her before pointing toward a hallway. "Executive. Floor, conference room B." No hesitation, no question, just direction. And Ava nodded quickly, grateful, not realizing she had just been sent somewhere she was never meant to be. The elevator ride felt too smooth, too quiet. Numbers climbing faster than her heartbeat could settle. 28, 29, 30. When the doors opened, the atmosphere changed, the air colder, sharper, like stepping into a place where decisions didn't just matter, they defined lives. She hesitated only a second before stepping out, following the sound of voices behind a pair of glass doors. Her hand hovered before she pushed them open, and the moment she did, everything stopped. A long, sleek table, a dozen sharply dressed executives, screens glowing with charts and numbers, conversations cut mid-sentence as every eye turned toward her, confusion, irritation, judgment, it all hit at once. Ava froze, her mind scrambling for words that wouldn't come. I'm here for the," she started, but one of the men near the end of the table frowned, whispering something under his breath. Another checked his watch, clearly unimpressed, the weight of the room pressed down on her chest, telling her she didn't belong, that she had made a mistake, that she should leave before someone asked her to. And she almost did. She almost stepped back, turned around, disappeared before the embarrassment could fully land. But then something unexpected happened. A voice, calm, controlled, cut through the silence. Wait. It wasn't loud, but it carried, the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to command attention. And just like that, the room stilled again. Ava's eyes lifted slowly, drawn to the man at the head of the table, Ethan Whitmore, though she didn't know his name yet. All she saw was the way everyone else subtly shifted when he spoke, the authority in the way he leaned back slightly, studying her, not with annoyance, but with something sharper, curiosity, like he was seeing something the rest of the room had missed. "You came in at an interesting moment," he said, his gaze steady on hers. "We've been debating a solution for the past 10 minutes. A faint pause then. "What do you think?" Ava blinked, certain she had misheard. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out logic. "Me?" she asked quietly, and a few executives exchanged glances. One almost laughed, but Ethan didn't look away, didn't soften the question. He simply waited, and something about that, the fact that he expected an answer, not an apology, shifted something inside her. Ava swallowed, glancing at the screen behind him. Numbers, projections, a problem she didn't fully understand but could feel, a hesitation. Flickered, then she spoke, cautiously at first, then clearer, connecting pieces, pointing out what everyone else had overlooked, her voice gaining strength with each word. The room didn't interrupt this time, didn't dismiss her. Instead it listened, truly listened, and when she finished, silence followed. But it was different now, not judgment, but surprise, the kind that lingers because it wasn't expected. Ethan's expression didn't change much, but there was a shift in his eyes, a recognition. Like a door opening somewhere unseen, he leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled, and for a moment, Ava forgot she was standing in soaked sneakers in a room she had no right to be in, because the way he looked at her made it feel like maybe she did. Interesting, he said finally, the corner of his mouth barely lifting. Then without breaking eye contact, he reached into a folder beside him, slid a document across the table. The sound of paper against polished wood unnaturally loud in the silence. I have another problem, he continued, his voice steady, measured, and I think you might be the solution. Ava's breath caught, confusion flashing across her face. The executives around the table shifted uneasily, sensing something unexpected unfolding. I need a wife, Ethan said simply, as if it were just another business decision, for a contract. The words hung in the air, unreal, impossible. Ava stared at him, certain she had misunderstood, that this was some kind of test she was failing. But his gaze didn't waver, didn't soften. Marry me, he added, quieter this time, more direct. And just like that, everything she thought she understood about the next 5 minutes of her life shattered completely, because this wasn't the interview she came for, and yet somehow, it might be the only offer she couldn't afford to refuse. Say yes, and everything changes. Say no, and nothing does. The words did not come from him this time, but they echoed inside Ava's head as she stared at the document lying on the polished table, the black ink sharp against the white paper, a contract that did not look like a joke, did not feel like a mistake, and yet made no sense in the world she knew. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides as she tried to steady her breathing, the room still watching her, not with curiosity anymore, but with something colder, skepticism, calculation, like they were already measuring how quickly she would fail. This is not funny, she said finally, her voice quiet but firm, refusing to let it shake. A few people shifted in their seats, one of them letting out a short, unimpressed breath, but Ethan did not smile, did not correct himself. I am not joking, he replied, his tone calm, almost clinical, like he was offering a position, not a life-altering decision. Ava shook her head slightly, stepping back half an inch. You do not even know me, she said. And for the first time there was a flicker of something in his expression, not doubt, but recognition, like that was exactly the point. Exactly, he said, leaning back in his chair. You are not tied to my world. You are not part of any board, any family alliance, any expectation. His eyes held her steadily. You are a clean solution. The words landed harder than she expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were true in a way that made her feel small, invisible, like everything she had been struggling through did not count for anything here except usefulness. Ava swallowed, her gaze dropping briefly to the contract again. The numbers printed there were not just large, they were unreal, enough to clear every bill, every debt, enough to keep her mother in treatment without counting every dollar, enough to breathe, really breathe for the first time in months. And that was the dangerous part. Not him, not the room, but the fact that she needed this. What is the catch? She asked, lifting her eyes again, because there had to be one. There was always one. Ethan did not hesitate. Public appearances, shared residence, 3 months minimum, renewable based on mutual agreement. He paused just enough for the words to settle. No emotional obligations. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Someone shifted uncomfortably, but Ava heard only the last line. No emotional obligations, like he was building a wall before anything even began. And when it ends, she pressed, her voice softer now but sharper. You walk away, he said simply, as if that part was the easiest. Ava let out a breath she did not realize she was holding, her mind racing, trying to keep up, to process something that felt like it belonged in a different life, a different version of her that did not exist. Why me? She asked again, because she needed to understand. Needed something that made sense beyond numbers and contracts. Ethan's gaze flicked briefly to the executives around the table, then back to her. Because you walked in here by mistake, he said, and still spoke like you belonged. The words hit somewhere deeper than she expected, not praise exactly, but not dismissal either, something in between that made her chest tighten. Ava looked around the room, really looked this time, at the polished suits, the subtle glances, the silent judgments already forming. She could feel it, the weight of being out of place, of being seen as less before she had even opened her mouth. And suddenly the contract felt like more than an escape. It felt like a test, one she had never asked for, but might not get another chance to face. Her hand moved slowly toward the table, hesitating just above the paper, her reflection faint in its surface, damp hair, tired eyes. Someone who had been told no too many times to count. This is business, she said, more to herself than to him, trying to ground the moment in something logical, something she could control. Only business. Ethan confirmed, his voice steady, but there was something quieter beneath it now, something she could not quite name. Ava closed her eyes for half a second, and in that brief darkness she saw her mother's face, heard the quiet strength in her voice, felt the pressure of time running out. When she opened them again, the room snapped back into focus. Sharper, louder, more real, her fingers pressed down on the contract, not signing yet, just touching it, like she needed to feel that it was real. If I say yes, she said slowly, meeting his gaze, I do this my way too. A subtle shift moved through the room, the idea of her setting terms almost laughable to some. But Ethan did not laugh, did not interrupt, he simply nodded once, giving her the space to continue. No disrespect, she added, her voice gaining strength. Not from them, not from anyone. Her eyes flicked briefly to the others at the table, then back to him. I am not going to stand there and pretend to be less than I am. Silence followed, heavier this time, more charged, because this was no longer just his offer, it was her decision shaping it. Ethan studied her for a long second, then leaned forward slightly, his hand resting near the contract. Agreed, he said, the single word cutting clean through the tension. Ava's heart pounded once, hard, as if sealing the moment before she even moved, and then, without giving herself time to second-guess, she picked up the pen, the weight of it unfamiliar in her hand, but steady enough. She signed her name, Ava Carter, the ink sinking into the page like a line, drawn between who she had been 5 minutes ago and who she was about to become. And as she set the pen down, the room shifted again, not in noise, not in movement, but in something less visible, the understanding that whatever this was, whatever she had just agreed to, it was no longer a mistake, it was a choice, and choices like this did not come without consequences. Ethan reached for the contract, glancing at her signature briefly before closing the folder with a soft, final sound. Welcome, Mrs. Whitmore, he said, and for the first time since she walked into that room, Ava felt something she could not quite define, not relief, not fear, but the unmistakable sense that she had just stepped into a life that would either break her completely or prove that she was never as small as they believed. A contract can change your life faster than any dream ever could. The words settled somewhere deep in Ava's chest as she stepped out of the conference room, the door closing softly behind her with a quiet finality that felt louder than anything she had ever heard. The hallway stretching long and silent in front of her, every polished surface reflecting a version of herself she barely recognized. Mrs. Whitmore, the name echoed in her mind. Unfamiliar, heavy, like a coat that did not quite fit yet. She looked down at her hands, still slightly damp from the rain. Still the same hands that had counted coins for bus fare just hours ago. And yet somehow everything had shifted. Miss Carter. A voice called behind her, precise and composed. Ava turned to see a woman approaching, mid-30s, sharp suit, posture flawless, the kind of person who looked like she had never been uncertain a day in her life. I am Claire, Mr. Whitmore's executive assistant. She extended a hand, her expression polite but measured, not unkind, just careful. We have a schedule to follow. Ava nodded slowly, shaking her hand, feeling the difference immediately. Claire's grip was firm, practiced, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Of course, Ava replied, though she had no idea what came next. Claire gestured down the hallway, already turning as if she expected Ava to follow without hesitation. First, we will need to address your appearance, she said, not cruelly, but directly. The words landing with quiet precision. Ava glanced down at her clothes, the worn fabric, the damp edges, and for a brief second, the old instinct to apologize surfaced, but she swallowed it back, remembering what she had said in that room. No disrespect, not from anyone, not even herself. Understood. She answered simply, her voice steady. Claire gave a small nod, acknowledging the response, and continued walking. The pace brisk, but not rushed, efficient, like everything in this world moved with purpose. They entered an elevator, the doors closing with a soft chime. And for a moment it was just the two of them, silence settling in. Ava watched the numbers descend this time, each floor bringing her closer to something she could not yet define. There will be media interest, Claire said after a moment, her tone matter of fact. Your background will be reviewed, questioned, and likely criticized. Ava's chest tightened slightly. Not from fear exactly, but from the weight of truth in those words. She had nothing to hide, but she also had nothing polished, nothing that fit neatly into the world she had just entered. I figured, Ava replied, her gaze still on the numbers. Claire studied her briefly, as if assessing not just her answer but the way she carried it. Mr. Whitmore does not make impulsive decisions, she added. If he chose you, there is a reason. Ava let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. I walked into the wrong room, she said, and for the first time, Claire's expression shifted just slightly, a flicker of something almost like curiosity. Perhaps, she said, or perhaps you walked into the right one at the exact wrong moment for everyone else. The elevator doors opened again, revealing a different part of the building, quieter, more private. They stepped into a space that felt less like an office and more like a transition, a place where people were prepared to be seen. Racks of clothing lined the walls, neatly organized, fabrics soft and expensive, colors chosen with intention. Ava slowed her steps, taking it in, the contrast so sharp it almost felt unreal. You will have a stylist, Claire explained, already moving toward a rack. We need to present a consistent image. Ava reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against a sleeve, the material smooth under her touch, nothing like the fabric she was used to, and for a moment she felt that familiar distance again, the sense that this world was not hers, that she was stepping into something temporary, something that could disappear just as quickly as it appeared. This does not change who I am, Ava said quietly, more to herself than to Claire, but Claire heard it, turning slightly. No, she replied, her tone neutral but not dismissive. But it will change how the world sees you. Ava let that settle, because she knew that part was true. She had felt it her entire life, how quickly people decided who you were based on what you wore, where you stood, how you spoke, and now, for the first time, she was being handed the tools to shift that perception, not erase it, but challenge it. A woman approached them then, introducing herself as the stylist, her smile bright, professional, already assessing Ava with practiced eyes. We have a lot to do, she said cheerfully, guiding Ava toward a mirror. And as Ava stood there, watching as hands began to adjust, measure, select, she caught her reflection again. But this time it was different, not because of what she wore, but because of the look in her own eyes, a quiet determination replacing the uncertainty that had been there before. She was still the same person who had walked through the rain, still the same person who had worried about every dollar. But now she was also something else, someone who had made a choice that could not be undone, someone who had stepped into a role that demanded more than survival. It demanded strength. And as the hours passed, as the worn jacket was replaced, as the damp curls were gently styled, as the mirror slowly revealed a version of her that could stand beside a man like Ethan Whitmore without apology, Ava realized something that shifted everything again. This was not just about pretending to belong. This was about proving that she already did, even if the world had not seen it yet. And somewhere in the back of her mind, beneath the layers of change and preparation, one thought remained steady, clear, and impossible to ignore. This may have started as his contract, but how it ended would be entirely up to her. A wedding can be silent and still change everything. The city lights blurred into soft streaks outside the tinted windows as the car moved smoothly through downtown. Ava sitting in the back seat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, the new fabric of her dress unfamiliar against her skin, elegant, precise, nothing like the clothes she had worn just hours ago. Across from her, Ethan Whitmore sat composed, his gaze fixed ahead, the space between them quiet, not uncomfortable, but not warm either, like two people who had agreed to share a moment without sharing themselves. The ceremony will be brief, he said finally, his voice calm, controlled, as if he were reviewing a meeting agenda, not a wedding. Ava nodded once, absorbing the words, brief, efficient, transactional. Everything about this was exactly what he had promised. "No guests?" she asked, her voice steady, though something in her chest tightened at the idea. Ethan glanced at her for a fraction of a second. "A lawyer, a witness, and the officiant," he replied, then added, "Discretion is necessary." Ava looked down at her hands again. The absence of family, of celebration, of anything resembling what a wedding was supposed to feel like settling quietly around her. But she reminded herself why she was here: the hospital bill, the promise of stability, the chance to step into something greater than survival. The car slowed, then stopped, and when the door opened, the cool evening air brushed against her face. The building in front of them simple, official, nothing extravagant, just a courthouse with clean lines and quiet. Authority. Ava stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the pavement, each step forward feeling heavier than the last. Not because she was unsure, but because she understood exactly how much this moment mattered. Inside, the hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt permanent, like decisions made here could not be undone. They were led into a small room, the lighting soft but neutral, a desk at the front, chairs arranged neatly, the officiant already waiting, a man with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. The lawyer stood to one side, flipping through documents, and another woman, likely the witness, offered a polite nod. Ava took her place beside Ethan, close enough to feel his presence, but not close enough to feel connected. The air between them still defined by the contract they had signed. The officiant began speaking, words Ava had heard before at other weddings, words meant to carry weight, meaning, emotion, but here they felt different, stripped down, simplified, like a script being followed without deviation. Ava listened, but her mind moved elsewhere for a moment, back to the version of herself that would have imagined this day differently, with laughter, with family, with something real. And yet here she was, standing in a quiet room with a man she barely knew, about to say words that would bind their lives together, even if only temporarily. "Do you, Ethan Whitmore, take Ava Carter as your wife?" The question cut through her thoughts, and Ethan answered without hesitation, "I do." His voice steady, unwavering, as if he had already decided everything long before this moment. Ava felt her heart beat once, hard. Then the officiant turned to her. "Do you, Ava Carter, take Ethan Whitmore as your husband?" The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence stretching just long enough to make the answer feel heavier than it should. Ava lifted her gaze, meeting Ethan's eyes for the briefest moment, searching for something, anything that might make this feel less like an agreement and more like a connection. But all she found was certainty, calm, controlled certainty, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what this was always meant to be. "I do," she said, her voice clear, stronger than she expected, the words settling into the room like a line drawn in ink. The officiant smiled gently, continuing the ceremony, guiding them through the final steps. Rings were presented, simple, elegant, symbols that carried more meaning than either of them had agreed to acknowledge. Ethan took her hand, his touch brief, respectful, as he placed the ring on her finger, the cool metal sliding into place. Ava followed, her fingers steady as she placed his ring, the gesture mirrored, balanced, complete. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said. The words official, final, and just like that, it was done. No applause, no celebration, just a quiet acknowledgement that something had begun. Ethan turned slightly toward her, offering a small nod, not a smile, not affection, just recognition. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said again, the name sounding more real this time. Ava let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the ring, the weight of the title, the weight of everything she had just stepped into. As they left the room, the hallway felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had happened, cars passing, lights glowing, people moving through their own lives unaware that hers had just shifted completely. The car door opened again, and Ava paused for a brief second before getting in, her reflection caught once more in the glass. But this time she did not look away. She held her own gaze, steady, unflinching, because whether this marriage was real or not, whether it lasted or not, one thing was already clear: she had not been chosen to disappear into this world. She had been chosen to stand in it, and she was not going to be anything less than exactly who she was. even if that meant rewriting the rules he thought he controlled. The real test does not begin at the wedding. It begins when the world starts watching. The gates opened slowly, revealing a driveway that stretched longer than anything Ava had ever seen, lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and soft golden lights that illuminated the path, like something out of a movie she never imagined herself in. The car gliding forward smoothly until the house came into full view, a massive estate standing tall against the night sky, its windows glowing warmly, elegant but distant, like it belonged to a different reality entirely. Ava felt her breath catch for just a second, not from awe, but from the quiet realization that this was now where she was expected to live. Your residence, Ethan said calmly, as if he were stating a fact that required no reaction. Ava nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the structure, counting the windows without meaning to, noticing the size, the silence, the absence of anything that felt lived in. It is big, she said softly, and for the first time there was the faintest hint of something in his tone, almost dry humor. It is efficient, he corrected, stepping out of the car. Ava followed, her heels clicking against the stone driveway, each step echoing slightly in the quiet. The front doors opened before they reached them, a staff member standing ready, posture straight, expression neutral. Good evening, Mr. Whitmore, the man said. Then his eyes shifted to Ava, just for a moment, assessing, measuring, not rude, but not welcoming either. Mrs. Whitmore, he added, the title spoken correctly but without warmth. Ava felt it immediately, that subtle difference, the way people acknowledged her now, not as a person, but as a position they had not yet decided how to treat. Good evening, she replied, her voice steady, refusing to shrink under the weight of that look. They stepped inside, and the interior matched the exterior, polished, controlled, everything in its place. The air carried a faint scent of something clean and expensive, the floors gleaming, the walls decorated with art that felt chosen rather than loved. Ava turned slowly, taking it in, but what stood out most was not what was there. It was what was missing: noise, warmth, life. It felt like a space designed to impress, not to live in. You will have your own wing, Ethan said, already walking forward, not looking back to see if she followed. But she did, matching his pace, her steps measured. There are guest rooms, a private office if you require it, and staff available at all times. Ava listened, absorbing the information, but her attention shifted to something else, the distance in his words, the way everything was structured to keep them separate, even under the same roof. And you, she said, her tone calm but direct. Where are you in all of this? Ethan paused briefly, just enough to acknowledge the question, then continued walking. Opposite side, he replied. Privacy is beneficial. Ava let out a small breath, not quite a laugh, but close. Of course it is, she said, more to herself than to him. They reached a set of doors, which opened to reveal a space that could have been its own apartment. Large windows, soft lighting, furniture arranged perfectly, everything ready, as if someone had anticipated her needs before she even knew them. Ava stepped inside, her gaze moving slowly across the room, touching nothing, just observing. Your belongings will be delivered tomorrow. Claire's voice came from behind her, precise as always. We have arranged everything necessary for your transition. Ava nodded. Though the word transition felt almost too small for what this was, she turned slightly, meeting Claire's eyes. Thank you, she said, meaning it, even if the situation itself was still settling into something she could understand. Claire gave a small, professional nod, then stepped back, leaving Ava alone with Ethan for the first time since the ceremony. The silence between them returned. Familiar now, but heavier in this space, more personal. Ava turned to face him fully, her arms crossing lightly, not defensive, but grounded. So this is how it works, she said. We live in the same house, play the part when needed, and otherwise pretend the other does not exist. Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable, then nodded once. That is the agreement. Ava held his gaze, searching again for something beyond the contract, something human. But if it was there, he did not show it easily. And if I do not follow the script exactly? She asked, a slight challenge in her tone. Ethan's eyes sharpened just slightly, not in anger, but in interest. Then you redefine it, he said, the answer unexpected, simple, but not dismissive. Ava blinked once, absorbing that, because it was not what she thought he would say, not what she expected from someone who controlled everything so carefully. Good, she replied quietly, then added, because I am not here to disappear into your world. Ethan did not respond immediately, but something in his posture shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a line had been drawn that he had not anticipated. That remains to be seen, he said finally, turning slightly as if the conversation had reached its natural end. But before he could leave, Ava spoke again, her voice steady, clear. I meant what I said in that room, she said. No disrespect. Ethan paused, then inclined his head slightly, not quite agreement, but acknowledgement, and with that, he stepped out, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Ava alone in a space that felt too large, too quiet. She stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle, then slowly walked toward the window, the city stretching out below her, lights flickering like distant possibilities. She reached down absent-mindedly, slipping off her heels, her feet finally touching the cool floor, grounding her, reminding her of something real, something unchanged. And as she stood there, looking out at a world that had no idea who she was or what she had just stepped into, one thought settled clearly in her mind. This house might belong to him. This life might be built by him. But the way she existed inside it, that part, that would belong entirely to her. The moment you step into the spotlight is the moment people decide who you are before you even speak. Morning came quietly, sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ava's new room, soft and golden, a sharp contrast to the restless thoughts that had followed her through the night. She had barely slept, not because of discomfort, but because everything felt too still, too unfamiliar, like she was waiting for something to happen, something to confirm that this was real. She stood by the window, arms wrapped lightly around herself, looking out over the city below, cars moving like steady streams, people already living their lives, unaware that hers had shifted completely in less than 24 hours. A soft knock broke the silence, precise and timed. Come in, Ava called, turning slightly as the door opened. Claire stepped in, tablet in hand, posture as composed as ever. Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore, she said, her tone neutral but efficient. Your schedule begins in 30 minutes. Ava raised an eyebrow slightly, the word schedule and begins landing with a weight. She was only starting to understand. Already? She asked, not complaining, just surprised. Claire gave a small nod. There is a press announcement this afternoon, she explained. Your appearance is required. Ava let out a slow breath, turning back to the window for a moment, the reflection of herself faintly visible in the glass. Dressed now in something tailored, something chosen, something that fit the role she had stepped into. Of course it is, she said quietly, then turned back, her expression settling into something calm, something prepared. What do I need to know? Claire stepped forward slightly, tapping her tablet. You will stand beside Mr. Whitmore, respond briefly if addressed, and avoid elaborating on personal details. She paused, then added, questions will be directed at you. Ava tilted her head slightly. About what? Claire met her gaze directly. Your background, your marriage, and why you. The last part hung in the air, not unkind, just honest. Ava nodded slowly, absorbing that, because she knew what that really meant. They would not just be asking questions, they would be testing her, measuring her, deciding if she belonged in a world they had already claimed. Understood, she said, her voice steady. Claire studied her for a brief moment, then gave a small nod. Your car will be ready in 20 minutes, she said, turning toward the door, but before she left, she added, one more thing. Ava waited. They will not expect you to succeed, Claire said, not harshly, just as a fact. Then she stepped out, leaving Ava alone again with the quiet, the words settling into the room like a challenge. Ava exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it sink in, then moved toward the mirror, standing in front of it, really looking this time, not at the clothes, not at the styling, but at herself, the same eyes, the same person, just placed in a different setting. Then they are going to be disappointed, she murmured softly, and with that, she turned, stepping into the day that would define how the world saw her. The building where the press conference was held stood tall and imposing, glass and steel reflecting the sky. Cameras already set up outside. Reporters gathered in clusters, their voices blending into a low hum of anticipation. Ava stepped out of the car beside Ethan, the flash of cameras immediate, bright, relentless, the sound of shutters clicking rapid and constant, like a storm of light surrounding them. She felt it instantly, the shift, the attention, the scrutiny, but she did not falter, did not step back. Instead she straightened slightly, her posture steady, her expression calm. Ethan walked beside her, composed as always, acknowledging the crowd with a slight nod, his presence commanding, controlled. They moved together toward the entrance, and for the first time, Ava was fully aware of what it meant to stand beside him, not behind, not hidden, but visible, equal in position even if not yet in perception. Inside, the room was already filled, rows of seats occupied, microphones lined up at the front, screens displaying the company logo behind the podium. Ava took her place beside Ethan, the lights brighter here, the focus sharper, every movement watched, every expression noted. Ethan began speaking, his voice clear, confident, addressing the business aspects, the strategy, the decisions that mattered to the room. Ava listened. But she also watched the audience, the subtle looks exchanged, the raised eyebrows, the quiet skepticism that did not need to be spoken aloud to be felt. And then it happened. A hand raised, a question directed not at him, but at her. Mrs. Whitmore. The reporter began, her tone polite but pointed. Can you tell us what qualifies you for this role? The room stilled slightly, the question. Simple on the surface, but loaded with implication. Ava felt it, the expectation that she would hesitate, that she would stumble, that she would confirm what they already believed, that she did not belong here. She glanced briefly at Ethan, but he did not intervene, did not redirect. He simply looked at her, waiting, and in that moment, Ava understood something clearly. This was her moment, not his. She stepped forward slightly, her voice steady, clear. Nothing qualifies me for this role, she said, and a ripple moved through the room. A few surprised glances, a shift in attention. But she did not stop, because this is not a role I trained for. She continued, her gaze moving across the audience, meeting their eyes one by one. It is a choice I made. Her voice did not rise, but it carried, firm, grounded. And I intend to prove that I deserve to stand here, not because of where I come from, but because of what I bring. Silence followed, heavier this time, not dismissive, but thoughtful. And for the first time since she walked into this world, Ava felt the balance shift, just slightly, just enough to matter. And as she stepped back beside Ethan, she did not need to look at him to know that something had changed, not in the contract, not in the arrangement, but in the way the world had just seen her, and in the way she had chosen to be seen. Respect is not given in rooms like this, it is taken, moment by moment. The silence that followed Ava's words in the press room did not break immediately. It stretched, subtle but powerful, as if the entire space needed a second to adjust to what had just happened. Then the murmurs began, low, controlled, but different now, not dismissive, not certain. Ethan stepped forward again, smoothly reclaiming the attention of the room, continuing the announcement as if nothing unusual had occurred. But Ava could feel it, the shift in energy, the way eyes returned to her not with quick judgment, but with curiosity that had not been there before, and that alone told her she had done something right. After the conference ended, the room slowly emptied, reporters gathering their things, exchanging quiet comments, some glancing back at her, trying to reconcile what they had expected with what they had just seen. Ava remained still for a moment, letting the noise fade, her pulse steady, her breathing controlled. She had not stumbled, she had not shrunk, and that mattered more than she expected. That was not in the briefing. Ethan's voice came from beside her, calm as always, but there was something different beneath it, something closer to interest than critique. Ava turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. Neither was I, she replied, her tone even, not defensive, not apologetic, just honest. Ethan held her gaze for a second longer than usual, then gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but real. Effective, he said simply, and for him, that was more than enough. They walked out together, the hallway quieter now, the controlled world of business resuming its rhythm, but Ava could feel the undercurrent, the way people looked at her differently as they passed. Not all of it positive, not all of it accepting, but no longer invisible. And that was the beginning of something. Outside, the air felt cooler, the city louder again, the car waiting where it had been before. But before they reached it, a voice cut through the space behind them, sharp, polished, and unmistakably deliberate. "Ethan." Both of them turned, and Ava saw her immediately. The woman approaching carried herself with a confidence that did not need to be announced. Every step measured, every detail precise, her suit tailored perfectly, her expression composed, but edged with something that felt personal, not professional. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze moving briefly over Ava, assessing, calculating, then returning to Ethan. "You move quickly," she said, her tone light, but carrying weight beneath it. Ethan's posture shifted slightly, not defensive, but aware. "Victoria," he acknowledged, his voice neutral. Ava watched the exchange carefully, sensing the tension that did not need to be spoken aloud. Victoria's eyes flicked back to Ava, this time lingering a fraction longer. "And this must be the solution," she said, her words smooth, but the implication clear. Ava met her gaze directly, refusing to look away. "Ava Whitmore," she said, introducing herself before the moment could be controlled by someone else. Victoria's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Of course," she replied. How unexpected. The word hung in the air, not as a compliment, but as a challenge. Ava felt it. The subtle attempt to define her before she could define herself. But she did not react, did not give the moment more weight than it deserved. Instead, she held her ground, calm, steady. "Sometimes unexpected is exactly what is needed," she said, her tone even, and for a brief second, something shifted in Victoria's expression, not approval, but acknowledgement that Ava was not as easy to dismiss as she might have assumed. Ethan stepped in slightly then, his voice cutting through the exchange. "We have a schedule," he said, not dismissing Victoria, but closing the conversation. Victoria nodded once, her attention returning fully to him. "We will talk," she said, her tone carrying meaning that extended beyond the moment. Then she turned, walking away with the same controlled confidence she had arrived with, leaving a quiet tension in her wake. Ava watched her go, then glanced at Ethan. "She does not like me," she said simply, not as a complaint, just an observation. Ethan opened the car door, his expression unchanged. "She does not like variables," he replied. Ava paused for a second, absorbing that, then nodded slightly. "Good," she said softly, stepping into the car, because she was beginning to understand something important. This world was not just about wealth or power. It was about control, about who fit into the structure and who disrupted it. And from the moment she walked into that room, she had been a disruption. The car door closed behind her, sealing in the quiet once more. Ethan took his seat across from her, the space between them familiar again, but different now, not just defined by a contract, but by something else, something unspoken that had started to form. "Victoria is on the board," he said after a moment, his tone informational, but deliberate. "She represents interests that do not align with unpredictability." Ava leaned back slightly, her gaze steady. "Then she is going to have a problem," she replied. And Ethan watched her for a brief second, something unreadable passing through his expression, before he looked away, out the window, the city moving around them. Because for the first time since this arrangement began, it was no longer just about maintaining control. It was about what happened when control met something it could not easily contain, and Ava Carter had just proven that she was exactly that. The moment people cannot control you, they start trying to expose you. The ride back to the estate was quieter than before, not because there was nothing to say, but because something had shifted between them, something neither of them addressed directly. Ava sat by the window, watching the city blur past in streaks of light, replaying the press conference in her mind. Every question, every look, every subtle reaction. She had held her ground, but she knew that was only the beginning, not the end. Beside her, Ethan remained composed, his attention occasionally shifting to his phone, responding to messages that seemed to arrive faster than he could read them. "They are reacting," he said finally, his voice calm, as if discussing whether. Ava glanced at him. "Good or bad?" she asked. Ethan's lips curved just slightly. Both, he replied. Which means it worked. Ava leaned back slightly, letting that settle, because she understood what that meant. Attention was currency in his world, and she had just become part of that economy, whether she wanted to or not. When the car pulled into the estate again, the gates closing quietly behind them, Ava felt a strange sense of familiarity already forming, not comfort, but recognition, as if this place was starting to learn her presence even if it had not accepted it yet. Inside, the atmosphere remained the same, controlled, quiet, but there was an undercurrent now, subtle shifts in how the staff looked at her, less dismissive, more cautious, like they were recalibrating their expectations. Ava walked through the space. With steady steps, no hesitation, no apology. She had decided something earlier that day, and she was not about to forget it now. This was not about fitting in. It was about redefining what belonging looked like. Dinner will be served in 1 hour, Claire informed them as she approached, her tablet already in hand. Ava nodded, but before she could move on, Claire added, "There has been media circulation." Ava paused, turning slightly. "Circulation?" she repeated. Claire's expression remained composed, but there was a slight shift in her tone, something more serious. "Your background," she clarified. "It is being discussed." Ava felt the words settle, not unexpected, but still heavy. "And?" she asked, her voice steady. Claire hesitated for half a second, then continued. "Some narratives are less than favorable." Ava let out a slow breath, her gaze drifting briefly to the floor, then back up. "Of course they are," she said quietly. Not surprised, not shaken, just acknowledging the reality. Ethan stepped in then, his tone sharper. "Handle it," he said to Claire, not harsh, but decisive. Claire nodded immediately. "Already in progress," she replied, then stepped back, leaving the moment to settle. Ava turned toward Ethan, her expression calm but focused. "What exactly are they saying?" she asked, because she needed to hear it, not guess. Ethan studied her for a moment, as if considering whether to answer directly. Then he did. "That you are unqualified," he said. "That this is a publicity move." A brief pause. "And that you were chosen because you are easy to control." The last part landed harder than the rest. Not because it was new, but because it was being said out loud. Ava felt something tighten in her chest. Not doubt, not fear, but something sharper, something that refused to accept that version of her. "They do not know me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Ethan's gaze held hers, steady, measuring. "They do not need to," he replied. "They only need others to believe it." Ava nodded slowly, absorbing that, because it was true. Perception was power in his world, and right now, that perception was being shaped without her consent. "Then we change that," she said, not asking, not suggesting, but stating. Ethan's expression shifted slightly, something almost like approval flickering beneath his usual control. "We will," he said, but Ava shook her head once, just enough to interrupt. "No," she corrected. "I will." The words hung between them, clear, deliberate. Ethan watched her for a moment, then inclined his head slightly, not arguing, not dismissing, just acknowledging that she had drawn a line he had not expected. Later that evening, Ava stood alone in her room, the city glowing outside the window, her reflection staring back at her, unchanged, and yet completely different. She held her phone in her hand, scrolling through headlines, articles, comments, each one trying to define her, reduce her, place her into a narrative that made sense to people who had never met her. Lucky girl. One headline read, strategic marriage or corporate distraction. Another questioned, and beneath it all, the quiet assumption that she was nothing more than a piece in someone else's plan. Ava lowered the phone slowly, her reflection still watching her, and for a moment, the weight of it all pressed in. The scrutiny, the judgment, the constant evaluation. But then something shifted, not outside, but inside her, a steady clarity that cut through the noise. She set the phone down, straightened slightly, and met her own gaze in the glass. "They can say whatever they want," she murmured softly, her voice calm but unwavering. "But they are going to have to watch me prove them wrong." And as she stood there, the city lights flickering behind her, Ava Carter understood something that would change everything moving forward. This was no longer just about surviving in a world that did not expect her to succeed. This was about stepping into that world and forcing it to see her exactly as she was. Not their version, not their assumption, but her truth. And that was something no contract, no headline, and no amount of doubt could take away from her. The truth does not break you, but the way it is hidden might. The next morning did not bring calm. It brought clarity, the kind that arrives quietly but changes everything once it settles. Ava stood in the kitchen alone, a cup of coffee in her hands, the warmth grounding her as sunlight spilled across the marble counters. Everything in the house still perfectly arranged, untouched by emotion, untouched by conflict, and yet she could feel it. Something beneath the surface, something shifting, growing, waiting. Her phone buzzed softly against the counter, the screen lighting up with another notification, another article, another opinion. But this one was different, not loud, not exaggerated, just precise enough to make her pause. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she read the headline. Sources question timing of Whitmore marriage amid pending board decision. Ava set the cup down slowly, her fingers tightening just slightly around the edge of the counter, not because of what it said, but because of what it implied. Timing, decision, something strategic, something planned, something that had nothing to do with her as a person and everything to do with her as a move. You found it. Ethan's voice came from behind her, calm, unsurprised. Ava turned slowly, her gaze steady. I was not looking for it, she said, holding up the phone slightly. But it looks like I walked into something else by mistake. Ethan stepped into the room, already dressed, already composed. As if nothing had shifted for him at all. It was going to surface eventually, he said, his tone measured. Ava watched him carefully. Then say it clearly, she replied, her voice firm, not raised, but direct. What exactly did I walk into? There was a brief pause, not hesitation, but calculation. Ethan did not avoid her gaze, did not deflect, but he also did not rush. The board is voting in 48 hours, he said finally, on control of the company. Ava felt the pieces begin to connect, not fully, but enough to understand the outline. And this marriage, she continued slowly, helps you keep that control. Ethan inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the truth without softening it. It stabilizes perception, he said, demonstrates personal alignment, reduces external leverage. The words were clinical, strategic, everything she expected from him, and yet hearing them now felt different, heavier. Ava let out a small breath, turning slightly away as she processed it, the room suddenly feeling larger, colder, not because of what he had done, but because of what she had not known. So I am not just your wife, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the shift inside her. I am your defense. Ethan did not correct her, did not deny it. You are part of the strategy, he said, and that was enough. More than enough. Ava nodded once, her jaw tightening slightly, not in anger, but in realization. You should have told me, she said, turning back to him, her eyes sharp now, not hurt, but clear. Ethan's expression remained controlled, but there was something else there now, something less certain. You would have said no, he replied. Ava held his gaze, unflinching. You do not know that, she said, and for a moment, the space between them felt different, not defined by distance, but by something more fragile, trust, or the lack of it. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with everything that had just been revealed. Ava finally stepped back slightly, creating her own space, her voice calmer now, but firmer. This changes things, she said, not as a question, but as a fact. Ethan nodded once. It does not change the agreement, he replied. Ava let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. It changes how I see it, she corrected, her eyes steady on his, and how I decide to stand in it. Ethan watched her carefully, as if reassessing something he thought he had already calculated. What are you saying? He asked. Ava straightened slightly, her posture grounded, her voice clear. I am saying that if I am going to stand next to you in front of that board, in front of that world, she said, then I am not doing it as your shield. A small pause, just enough to let the words settle. I am doing it as someone they cannot ignore. The air shifted again, subtle but undeniable. Ethan did not respond immediately, but something in his gaze changed, not resistance, not agreement, but recognition, as if he was seeing her not just as part of the plan, but as something that could reshape it. Then you will need to understand the stakes, he said finally, his voice quieter now, more measured. Ava nodded once. I already do, she replied. I just did not know I was part of them. The moment lingered, then broke as Claire entered, her presence precise as always. There is a board preparation meeting in 1 hour, she announced, her eyes moving briefly between them, sensing the shift but not commenting on it. Ava nodded, her expression composed again, but stronger, clearer. Good, she said. Then I think it is time I learn exactly what I am walking into. And as she stepped past Ethan, moving toward the door with steady confidence, one thing became undeniable. She had entered this world by accident. She had accepted the contract out of necessity, but from this moment forward, every step she took inside, it would be intentional, and whether he had planned for it or not, Ava Carter was no longer just part of his strategy. She was becoming something far more powerful, something that could not be easily controlled. Power does not reveal itself in speeches, it reveals itself in who is allowed to speak. The boardroom felt different from the moment Ava stepped inside, not because of how it looked, but because of who was in it. Long glass walls overlooking the city, a table that seemed to stretch farther than it needed to, seats already occupied by people who carried influence in the way they sat, in the way they looked, in the way they did not need to introduce themselves to be known. Ava walked in beside Ethan, her posture steady, her pace measured, every step intentional. She could feel the attention shift immediately, subtle but unmistakable. Conversations lowering, eyes lifting, assessing, calculating, and for the first time, it was not curiosity she felt from them. It was resistance, quiet but firm. Mr. Whitmore, one of the board members said as they took their seats, his tone polite but edged with something sharper. We were not informed your arrangement would be present. The pause before the last word was deliberate. Ava did not react outwardly, but she registered it. The way he chose not to call her by name, not to acknowledge her as anything beyond a concept. Ethan did not hesitate. Mrs. Whitmore is relevant to this discussion, he replied, his voice calm, controlled, leaving no room for debate. A few glances were exchanged across the table, silent conversations happening without words, and Ava understood immediately. This was not just about business. This was about control, about who had the authority to define what mattered. She took her seat, her hands resting lightly on the table, not tense, not withdrawn, just present. The meeting began, numbers, projections, legal language flowing across the room. Ava listened carefully, not interrupting, not inserting herself prematurely. She followed the discussion, the structure, the tension beneath it, because even without knowing every detail, she could feel the divide. One side aligned with Ethan, the other, waiting, watching for an opportunity. The timing of your recent decision raises questions. Victoria's voice entered smoothly, her tone calm but precise, drawing the room's attention without effort. Ava's eyes shifted to her, taking in every detail, every controlled movement, every calculated word, questions of stability, perception, and intent. Victoria continued, her gaze moving briefly to Ava, then back to Ethan. Investors are not reassured by unpredictability. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged. They are reassured by results, he replied. But Ava could see it now, the underlying tension, the push and pull that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with power. Victoria's lips curved slightly. Results require confidence, she said, and confidence requires clarity. The room quieted, the kind of silence that signaled something building, something waiting to land. Perhaps, she added, her tone almost casual, Mrs. Whitmore would like to clarify her role. The words were directed at Ethan, but the implication was clear. They were not asking her to speak, they were challenging her existence in the room. Ava felt the moment settle around her, heavy, deliberate. This was not an accident. This was a test, the kind designed to expose weakness, to reinforce doubt, and for a brief second, she understood exactly what they expected: hesitation, uncertainty, proof that she did not belong here. But instead of shrinking, instead of waiting for Ethan to respond, Ava moved, just slightly, enough to shift the focus. I would, she said, her voice steady, cutting cleanly through the tension. The room stilled. Again, Not with dismissal this time, but with attention, real attention. Ava met Victoria's gaze directly, then let it move across the table, acknowledging each person without lowering her own presence. "You are right," she said, her tone calm, not defensive. "Clarity matters." A pause, just enough to let them listen, not just hear. "So let me be clear," she continued, her hands resting lightly on the table, grounded, controlled. "I was not brought here to fit into your expectations." A subtle shift in the room, not discomfort, but interest. "I was brought here because something in this structure is not working." Her gaze moved back to Victoria, steady, unwavering. "And sometimes the only way to change that is to introduce something you cannot predict." Silence followed. Heavier now, not dismissive, not skeptical, but thoughtful. Ava held it, did not rush to fill it, did not back away from it, because she understood something in that moment that changed everything. This was not about proving she belonged by their standards. This was about redefining those standards entirely. Victoria watched her, her expression controlled. But there was something new there now. Not approval, but recognition, the kind given when someone realizes they may have underestimated the situation. "Interesting perspective," she said finally, her tone smooth, but no longer dismissive. Ethan did not speak immediately, but Ava could feel it, the shift beside her, the way the dynamic had changed. Not completely, not yet, but enough to matter, enough to disrupt the narrative that had been quietly forming without her. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere was different now, more focused, more cautious, as if every word carried a little more weight than before. And as Ava sat there, listening, observing, understanding the rhythm of a world she had only just entered, one thing became undeniably clear. She was no longer reacting to the game being played around her. She was becoming part of it, and more importantly, she was beginning to change how it was played, whether they were ready for that or not. The moment you stop being underestimated, you become a threat. The boardroom did not return to normal after Ava spoke. It could not, because something had shifted that could not be undone. The air felt tighter, sharper, every voice more measured, as if each person now understood that the dynamic had changed, not dramatically, not completely, but enough to force attention where there had once been dismissal. Ava remained still, composed, her hands resting lightly on the table as the discussion continued. But her focus had sharpened. She was no longer just observing. She was reading the room, the pauses, the glances, the subtle alignments forming and breaking beneath the surface. She saw it clearly now. This was not just a business meeting. It was a negotiation of power, and every word carried weight. "We are not here to experiment." Another board member spoke, his tone controlled but firm, his eyes briefly shifting toward Ava before returning to Ethan. "We are here to protect stability." Ava did not react immediately, but she registered the phrasing, "not here to experiment," as if she were an idea rather than a person, a variable to be eliminated rather than understood. Ethan responded smoothly, reinforcing performance metrics, long-term strategy, the language of control. But Ava noticed something else, something subtle but important. The room was no longer ignoring her. They were working around her, adjusting to her presence. And that meant she had already disrupted more than they were willing to admit. The meeting moved forward. But tension lingered, quiet, persistent, like a current running beneath still water. When it finally ended, chairs shifted, papers gathered, voices lowered again into private conversations. Ava stood slowly, her posture unchanged, but her awareness heightened. She could feel it now, the difference in how people looked at her, not all of it welcoming, not all of it respectful, but no longer dismissive. And that was a beginning. As they stepped out into the hallway, Ethan walked beside her in silence for a moment before speaking. "You accelerated the timeline," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. Ava glanced at him slightly. "I answered a question," she replied, her tone even. Ethan stopped walking, turning just enough to face her fully. "You changed the perception," he said, and there was no criticism in his voice, only acknowledgement. Ava held his gaze, steady. "Good," she said, "because the current one does not work for me." A brief pause settled between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with something new, something neither of them had defined yet. Ethan studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "It works in our favor," he said, "and for the first time, The word "are" did not feel entirely transactional. Ava noticed it, did not comment on it, but did not ignore it either. They continued walking, the quiet of the hallway returning, but Ava's mind was already moving ahead, connecting pieces, seeing patterns, because something had become clear to her in that room. This was not just about standing beside Ethan. It was about understanding the structure he was fighting to control and where she fit within it. Victoria is not just opposing you, Ava said after a moment, her tone thoughtful. Ethan glanced at her. No, he replied. She is positioning herself. Ava nodded slightly. Then she will not stop at questioning me, she continued. She will use me. Ethan's expression shifted subtly, not surprise, but recognition. She will try, he said. Ava slowed her steps slightly, her gaze focused ahead. Then we should be ready, she said, not as a suggestion, but as a decision. Ethan did not respond immediately, but there was a quiet agreement in the way he continued walking beside her. Later that evening, Ava stood once again by the window in her room, the city stretching endlessly below, but this time, the view felt different, not distant, not separate, but connected, like she was beginning to understand her place within it. Her phone buzzed again, another message, but this time it was not a headline. It was a direct notification, an invitation. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the text. Private board dinner, tomorrow evening. The sender's name clear, Victoria. Ava's expression did not. As she stood there, the city lights flickering behind her, one thing became certain. Whatever came next was not going to be about proving she belonged. It was going to be about proving that she could not be removed. And whether Victoria realized it or not, the moment she extended that invitation, she had just opened the door for Ava to step even deeper into the game. And this time, Ava was not walking in by mistake. The most dangerous moment in any game is when your opponent thinks they already understand you. The evening air carried a quiet tension as Ava stepped out of the car, the city skyline glowing behind the private restaurant where the dinner was being held. The kind of place where conversations shaped outcomes long before decisions were made official. The entrance discreet, but guarded by presence rather than security. A silent understanding that those who belonged would already know how to enter. Ava adjusted her posture slightly, the fabric of her dress moving with controlled elegance. Nothing excessive, nothing loud, but deliberate. Every detail chosen not to impress, but to communicate. She was not here by accident. She was not here to be observed. She was here to participate. Ethan stood beside her, his expression composed as always, but there was a subtle shift in his gaze, something more attentive, more aware. You do not have to attend, he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Ava glanced at him, her expression calm. She invited me, not you. Seat, aware of every glance, every subtle shift in attention. The room quieter than it had been earlier, more focused, because this was not a public setting. This was where real intentions surfaced. Dinner began with polite conversation, surface-level exchanges that carried no weight. But Ava did not engage deeply. She listened, observed, allowed the rhythm of the room to reveal itself. Who spoke first, who interrupted, who deferred, who controlled the direction without appearing to, and then, as expected, the shift came. Victoria set her glass down gently, her attention turning fully toward Ava. You have adapted quickly, she said, her tone almost complimentary, but not quite. Ava inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the statement without accepting the implication behind it. I learn quickly, she replied. Victoria's gaze sharpened just slightly. That will be necessary, she said, because this environment does not reward uncertainty. Ava held her gaze, unflinching. Then it is a good thing I am not uncertain, she answered, the words simple, but firm. A subtle shift moved through the table, not loud, not obvious, but present. Victoria leaned back slightly, studying her. Confidence is easy to claim, she said. It is more difficult to sustain. Ava did not look away, did not retreat. So is control, she replied, and for a fraction of a second, the room stilled, not in discomfort, but in recognition that the conversation had moved beyond polite boundaries. Heavier, because the truth had been spoken without hesitation. Victoria held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, slowly. Perhaps, she said, but there was no denial in her tone, no dismissal. Only a quiet acceptance that Ava had seen through the surface of the conversation. The dinner continued, but the dynamic had shifted again, not dramatically, but enough to alter the balance. And as Ava sat there, fully present, fully aware, one thing became undeniable. She was no longer being tested to see if she could survive in this world. She was being evaluated to determine how much influence she could hold within it. And for the first time since this began, Ava realized something that changed everything. She was not just part of the game. She was becoming a factor that could determine its outcome. And that was something no one at that table, not even Victoria, could afford to ignore. The final move is never the loudest. It is the one no one sees coming until it is too late to stop it. The morning of the vote arrived without ceremony, the sky clear, the city calm, as if nothing significant was about to unfold. But inside Whitmore Tower, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Ava stood in front of the mirror one last time, not adjusting her appearance, but grounding herself, her reflection steady, focused, not the girl who had walked in by mistake, not the woman they had tried to define, but someone who now understood exactly where she stood and why it mattered. She stepped. Matter that remains unclear. Her gaze shifted, not to Ethan, but to Ava. Your role and what comes next. The question was not unexpected, but it was deliberate. One last attempt to define the narrative before the outcome was sealed. Ava felt the weight of it, but she did not hesitate. She did not look to Ethan. She did not wait for permission. She stepped forward slightly, her voice steady, clear. My role is not to maintain what already exists, she said, her gaze moving across the table, meeting each person without lowering her own presence. It is to make sure it evolves. A quiet ripple moved through the room, not resistance, not agreement, but attention, real attention. You can vote based on what you think I represent, she continued. Or you can vote based on what you know this company needs. Her tone did not rise, but it carried, firm, grounded, because whether I am here or not, she added, her eyes returning to Victoria. The problem I walked into still exists. Silence followed, deeper than before, heavier, because this was no longer about her. It was about the truth she had uncovered, the structure that needed to change, the decision they could no longer avoid. Victoria held her gaze, and for the first time, there was no challenge in her expression, no attempt to undermine. Only a quiet acknowledgement that the conversation had moved beyond control. The vote was called, one by one, names spoken, decisions made, the tension building with each response. Ava stood still, her hands steady, her focus unwavering. She did not count, did not anticipate. She simply remained present, because she understood something now that she had not at the beginning. This was not about winning or losing. It was about standing in a way that could not be ignored. The final vote was cast. The result clear. Ethan retained control, but the room did not react with celebration, not with relief, but with something more complex, acceptance, adjustment, the understanding that the balance had shifted and would not return to what it had been. Ethan turned slightly toward Ava, not speaking, but the look in his eyes different now, no longer calculating, no longer distant, but something quieter, something closer to respect. Ava met his gaze briefly, then looked forward again, because this moment was not just his, it was hers too. As